And so we're going to kind of create a group around that. And part of the thing is we can't just say, okay, all the data warehouse team, go focus on that. It's got to have the institutional effectiveness folks, the chief academic officers, the presidents. That's where they're the ones who the users in terms of have to help define how that is going to be developed, working with the technology folks, and that's one of our opportunities. Second opportunity, I think, but it also relates to the challenge, is what we're doing in terms of distance education, which I think is wonderful. And if you all don't know this, if you go around the country now, you will hear sometimes there's if you go into some of these national conferences, particularly these aren't community college conferences, but when people are talking about what should be done in education, there's a guy from Harvard who's a very interesting guy, Harvard Business School professor, very well known, named Clayton Christensen, who is sort of the innovation guru, if you will. And so some folks asked him to look at and he talks about the notion of disruptive innovations. And what they mean by disruptive innovations is not so much incremental innovation, but something that comes and just changes the paradigm. So some folks wanted him to look at the notion of disruptive education or disruptive innovation within education. And the example that they have lit upon, that they use a lot as the prime example, is distance education within the North Carolina community college system. The fact that, we were faced with this challenge of how do you serve so many people, how do you deal with the resource challenge, and that distance education became the disruptive innovation. Now, here's the challenge in terms of distance education as I see it, and you all help me, and you're the experts, so you tell me if I'm wrong. But one of the things is over the years, we have developed lots of resources to support. And to me, this is where the 21st century teaching comes in. Teaching using technology. And we started with the VLC, and I went for a while, I was at the system office, and I heard a heck of a lot about the VLC. And then I went to a community college as president, and I found out nobody there used the VLC. And I'd say, well, you guys know about this? Well, sort of, yeah, we know about it. And it was both a communications thing, but it was a quality issue too. We had some good things, but it was a little difficult in some things. And so it was not used that much. And I think we've gotten beyond that to a certain extent. And we changed our philosophy. We decided that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we decided that folks don't really teach courses in terms of cookie cutter courses. I mean, I think it's almost like paint by numbers. You don't give an artist and say, look, all you got to do is fill in the dots, and then they got the painting. That's the way teachers are as well. But if you can tell someone, here's a learning object that you can put into your painting, they will use that. Now, the problem becomes with all these tools we've developed, it seems to me, is that a lot of folks still don't know about them. And you got to think about it. A lot of the folks we're talking about are adjunct faculty. I mean, even when you're talking about full-time faculty, they don't know about it, don't use it, but then the adjunct faculty, some that have been hired the week before the stinking class starts. And we develop lots of resources. One of my pet peeves, Sandra will tell you, has been the fact that we developed through our vocational education resources a tool for teachers called NCNet, which is a great tool. But for whatever reason, we had to keep these things separate. We have this over here and this over here and NCNet over here, and we assume that some poor person who has to come in and put together a course within 2 weeks is going to figure all that stuff out for them. And somehow we've got to pull all of that together and make it much easier and realize the challenges that we place on our teachers and how do you access and what do you access. The other thing that we've talked about that I think is important is this issue of developing richer resources for fewer courses. Richer resources for fewer courses. Here's the reason why. A couple of years ago, I asked for some data to find out, well, if you look at that point in time, this is about 2 years ago data, 26% of all our enrollment was in 20 courses. 20 courses. Now, if that's the case, maybe we get bigger bang for buck by putting a lot of our focus on those fewer courses as opposed to the breadth of courses that we have. how deep can we go in some of these areas? And I'll tell you, over time, if you look at some of the ways we're thinking about curriculum, I think it's going to be even more concentrated. I mean, one of the things, so now the VLCs are working because we're working on this issue of distance education. You know, we've got to shorten the cycle of distance education. And whether people don't like that or not, I mean, we cannot have people a year and a half in distance education. It just is not working. But so that's where you have, you know, the development of shorter modules. And so we need to have that be very rich resource that it can be. You look at the changes in terms of career and college promise. You know, you've got now very clear pathways. You've got 4 transfer pathways, but if you look in those 4 transfer pathways, you have overlaps of 4 courses. English 111, 112, Introduction to Literature, Western Civ. I mean, you can tell, we can tell where there's going to be lots of volume in terms, and so maybe those are the places we really need to pay attention to. You know, what are the competencies, but then what are the learning objects that come under each? What are those tools that help us develop that? And so we need to pull together in a single place where teachers can go, it seems to me, where they can more seamlessly access all the teaching resources they may need. And in some of these areas, they need to be, and in some of the courses, we need to go much deeper and focus in those areas. So that's sort of my thinking with that and some of the conversations we've had. And you all know a lot about that, so I'm going to stop and shut up because I may have said things that you don't agree with. And one of the things we say back at the system office is say it in the meeting, not out in the hallway. That doesn't mean you can't go out and talk in the hallway, but just don't be afraid to say it in here if you disagree with that. But I just throw that out there for conversation, because if I'm wrong about that, please tell me that you think I'm wrong about that, because I need to know. Just thoughts?
I think in terms of, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Brian. I was just thinking in terms of technology, sometimes we throw that term around, and I think, Dave, maybe you mentioned it in your roundtable earlier, is first of all, thinking about optimizing a particular process before you automate it. Otherwise, technology as an accelerator will just accelerate the failure. As opposed to...
Yeah, it's sort of like if you have bad data, but you have the technology to access that bad data quicker. I mean, when I was a college president, you could get a spreadsheet a lot quicker, and then you'd look at it and say, this cannot be right. You know, that's the difference.
Dr. Ralls, you mentioned a lot of things here, and I'm very excited, especially with Success MC. And I like the fact when you talk about completion by design, you said the litmus test of success is not just with the degrees and certificates that students receive, but the jobs that they're able to receive. So there's a lot of the concept you shared here that's wonderful. The one thing that I think as a technologist that we tend to have challenges is not necessarily with the technologist itself, as you kind of mentioned and alluded. And one of those things that I would say is that you state here, for instance, that online classes, we like to shorten the modules, for instance.
That's in developmental education.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't say online.
And we see that with the math, and we're involved with that. We're very excited about those things. But the challenge that I face as a technologist, and I get a pretty bad raw deal at the college because they keep feeling that technology is what limiting them. The problem is, many times it's the process that we have, and Vernon just alluded to that. And one of those things, for instance, is like our reporting. We just talked about data. It's not just about the integrity of data, but the reasons why we're collecting that data.
Or whether we should be collecting it at all.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, for instance, an example is that one thing that's limiting for us is that we want to improve on our online admissions process, especially for our continuing education. But the data that we collect are things that they don't want to provide. Some of them is just outdated. We still follow the regulations from reporting of 1997 that collects whether you want to take class during the day or night. I don't know what that data is for.
Yeah, whether you're left-handed, right-handed, taking it day or night.
Yes, sir. And so there is a domino effect.
You've hit on something very clear, and that's where we have to, because we don't need to go, and let's take the data issue. We don't need to go and automate the way in which we collect all the data that we don't pay attention to right now anyway. You know, and that's one of the things that and that's where we really need your help. Now, this is one of the things where I'm going to say, Emily is in her role. One of the things that we did as part of those listening tours is we have a team at the system office called the Barrier Busters. And the Barrier Busters, we documented, and you can actually go on that webpage now and you can see every barrier that was identified. And part of that team, which I think meets tomorrow, is to identify those and take those away. Now, one of the things you've identified very clearly is something that happened over a period of years, is we collect all kinds of data. We put all kinds of requirements on you, and then we pay no attention to whatever it was. And it's not that, you know, to be honest with you, I don't even know that we know we're asking you to collect it. We just never have changed the process to tell you, stop sending it in. I think that's one of the advantages of the SaaS initiative, because we don't need to go back and re-automate and take every data element we collect and say, okay, now the colleges can submit it this way. We need to start with the big 8 and start with what you're doing with completion by design and be very selective about the data we require. Now, there's some things that I'd love to be able to get you out of, but I can't. You know, there are things that you just have to turn in because we have to turn them in. But if it's not something that we have an obligation to turn in, or something that influences our decision making in terms of what we do, we don't need to be collecting it anymore. And that's why we need your help to identify just those kinds of things. Like you said, what is it, daytime or nighttime? Yeah. Now, there may be a good reason we collect it, but somebody needs to tell us why before we keep it. Those are the kind, and that's why, and I would ask you to find those things, and that's going to be one of Emily's roles in that regard, is how we go out, because, you know, we're challenged just like you are. We're challenged because we got 50 less people at the system office. Now, I don't say that to whine. I say that to support exactly what you said, because just like you, we have no time to collect data or to go through steps or processes that don't add value. And when you see those things, we need to bring them to the forefront and try to remove them and get them out of the way.
So will there be a committee or an avenue for the colleges that can report these things, so that we can have this discussion of whether we can either modify them or remove them?
Well, in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where this big group, and that should be a part of that group, because as we create a new data system, if you will, one of the big charges is we need to clean the trash out. You know, we don't need to collect all the data that we're collecting. I mean, I think one of the things that's happened is over time we haven't been as disciplined about, we've put requirements out there, we need to collect data on this, we need to collect data on that. Somebody said that at some point along the way, and we just didn't pay attention to everything that's in there. And I think that needs to be a very fundamental piece of that. That's why you start small and then you build onto, you don't just go and put a technology on top of the data collection processes we have now. And I think that's something that Bill Schneider says very clearly. We start smaller, and what do we need to collect? What do we have to collect? And then you slowly add to that, but be very, knowing that every time you add a new requirement for data, you're taking some bandwidth from something to do that. So there has to be good value that's coming out of that.
And wouldn't there be reasons to collect data different? The system office would have different reasoning than local colleges would have for collecting certain data, such as, do you want daytime or evening classes? Well, I immediately switched over to that could be marketing, and in an email kind of situation, why not send out, this is our evening class list to students.
But we have no reason to collect that.
State doesn't, but are we collecting that data for local colleges?
I don't know. I doubt it, but I don't know. If we are, I bet you're not using it in that purpose.
No, that one specifically is state required. You were
Yeah.
very clear.
I mean,
Yeah. Now, the other thing you got to pay attention to as well is, as we've gone out on this, there's some things, now it's not data per se, but sometimes you'll find out that someone says, why do we have to do this? And then we look, and you really don't have to do that.